I played in my first ever Geoguessr tournament. This tourney was part of the Premier High School Geoguessr League, which is a league for players under 18. The format of the tournament was an arbitrary rule world, 30 seconds, no moving, and the tournament featured a lot of elite high caliber players, including Gorka, Akinator, Roscommon, Karilka, and a lot more amazing players. So I was thrilled, and when I saw the tournament come up, I knew I had to participate. The first portion of the tournament was an open qualifier on live challenges. Around 20 players competed in the qualifiers, and the top 16 advanced to the bracket. The format of the qualifiers was that the top four from each of the four live challenges would advance to the actual bracket, and once you advance, you stop playing. In total, 16 players would move on to the next stage. And without further ado, let's get into some gameplay. So I actually forgot to record during my first round because I guess I just wasn't ready and then the game just started pretty quickly. But this here I knew was gonna be South Africa, driving on the left hand side of the road, and we had a pretty green landscape but with red dirt. So I kind of started to switch more north here, and then I sent it in. And yeah, I was actually just close to Pretoria, which was kind of a hard round. But I ended up on top of the leaderboard here after two rounds, which was a bit surprising. I don't actually remember what the first round was, but I think it was pretty easy or not too difficult at least. And we ended up in first after the first two rounds. And here we're in Brazil. I'm looking at that truck for any kind of information. We have pretty red dirt, which is typical of Brazil, but it didn't feel too northeast. So I was thinking Bahia or Minas Gerais possibly, and then I ended up going for northern Minas Gerais. Just felt right with the landscape, and yeah, just ends up being a little bit farther south, but I got the state, and by now we're in first by about 150 points. So feeling pretty good. Um, I definitely didn't expect to be in any sort of position near the top after the first game. And here we had these French kind of square poles, square concrete poles, and it felt a little bit Atlantic to me for some reason, or coastal. It was quite green. Something about the foliage possibly felt farther west. So I sent it in kind of central west, and um, it ends up being pretty close by actually, just a little bit farther over, 38 miles away, and now I'm in first by over 200 points. Now into the final round. So this was Australia. The sun's in the north. We also have ocean to the north, which is very atypical of Australia. So I was trying to think where you would see coast to the north in Australia. And with this kind of foliage and very sandy white sand, I wasn't really sure where to go. So I mean, my only thought as to where you would have coast north was possibly Tasmania. So that was the only thing I could think of before the timer went off. And then, of course, it just ends up being South Australia, and a bunch of people get it. And I dropped to seventh on the final round. So yeah, ended up in seventh in the first game, which I mean, all in all, isn't too bad considering there were about 20 players. But I definitely could have won with some better guesses. All right. So the second game here, the top four that qualified from the first game do not play, or they can play if they want to play for fun, but the scores don't count. And now I just really want to get a top four spot and make sure I qualify. First round here, Brazil again. Some pretty red dirt again, feeling maybe more central or south with this kind of very green foliage. I just go in Goiás here, and it ends up being on the border between a few states. And I'm in ninth after the first round, which isn't necessarily ideal because I'm trying to get top four, but it's okay. We can come from we can come from behind. That's how we like to do it over here. So this is RG. I've noticed that when I was practicing for this tournament, I had a lot of rounds in these three southern provinces on this map. Rio Negro, Chubut, and Santa Cruz. So I remember having a round in this northern area of Santa Cruz that maybe looked a little bit similar. So I end up going for that, but it does end up being in Tierra del Fuego. And most people don't get it, but three people get it. So shout out to those three, and we stay in ninth. All right, going into the third round, Gorka, Roscommon, Akinator on top of the leaderboard. Some big, very elite players in this leaderboard. And I see the sun is in the north, which means we're going to be in the southern hemisphere. And I just missed it, but there was what looked to be an Argentinian pole in the distance. So I sent in relatively northern Argentina. I wasn't feeling great about this guess. I wasn't sure if I was right, but it felt right to me. I didn't really know what else it could be. And of course, it does end up being Arg, just a little bit farther south. And we move up to eighth on the leaderboard. So some pretty solid, consistent gameplay so far, but nothing too crazy, which is kind of what we need in these last two rounds to clinch a top four spot and qualify. So here we have Peru, a very typical agricultural valley surrounded by some pretty dry but sizable mountains. So I really thought this should be somewhere north, maybe Chiclayo, Trujillo, Chimbote, one of those areas. There are a ton of these kind of valleys around little rivers in this northern area of Peru. So I thought that felt about right. And I sent pretty quickly around Trujillo, and it ends up being closer to Chimbote. But we get 91 miles away and jump up to fifth. So I was feeling pretty good about that one. And basically, I just needed to clutch up here. And if I advanced one spot, I could qualify. So here we have this big Gen 2 ring around the sun, as well as the car, and it feels like Southern Africa, but Gen 2 is going to confirm that we're in South Africa specifically. This long golden grass made me feel like it was near Eswatini for some reason, because that grass is pretty common in Eswa. So that's where I go. I don't really think about it much, and unfortunately, it ends up being a little bit farther west, or a good amount actually, closer to Johannesburg, and we end up in fifth there. But as you see, the player in fourth, Krabs NM, um, already qualified. So I made a quality spot, and this is the final bracket.
Is Geo Panda versus Jaquan.
All right, so now into my first duel, round of 16, playing Jaquan, who I believe is from Canada. And first round here wasn't easy by any means. Very green foliage, a white back of the car. I was thinking Philippines or Indonesia. Initially, I thought Indonesia, but I ran out of time and ended up sending Philippines, and it was just Sulawesi there. But we both go Philly, and I only lose about 30 points. So now the second round, um, in Indonesia again, actually, driving on the left-hand side of the road, white road lines, and it was a very dry landscape, which is something that is common on the eastern islands, like the East Nusa, Sumba, Timor even. So immediately I zoom into that area of Indonesia, thinking one of the Nusas or possibly Sumba, but with extreme dryness, I end up sending Sumba, and it ends up on Timor actually. Jaquan goes just in the Nusas there, not too far from me. So far, not too many points exchanged in the duel thus far. Third round, Um, a pretty rolling landscape in Russia, some hills. It looks like possibly autumn coverage. The black base of the poles in the distance immediately give it away as Russia as well. So I'm not too knowledgeable in terms of Russia, but it didn't feel too far south to me, but did kind of feel close to the river, so I end up sending Saratov there. Yep, just pretty close to the city. I'm looking at other areas, but I do end up going for that. And pretty big points. First big points of the duel. I end up a lot closer than Jaquan, who goes south, which is also a reasonable guess. Now, the fourth round. Um, a red back of the car here. It's definitely European, probably somewhere in Central Europe. White single road inner road lines, very green rolling landscape, some hills, trees, stuff like that. I'm honestly really not sure here. I was thinking maybe Austria, Germany, maybe even Czechia. Um, I zoom in somewhere in the map. I try to look at the copyright last second, but it looks like 2023, which made me lean towards Germany. And of course, it's just Slovakia with that red back of the car. And that's almost half my health already gone. So a bit of a blunder there. Um, Not a very good guess in hindsight. That was definitely gettable. But now we're back in Czechoslovakia with these bollards, either Czechia or Slovakia. It's a bit of an interesting round. It's like flat, but not in the way that would be typical of Czechia. So I was just thinking Czechia. It didn't feel like Slovakia, which is typically more hilly. And of course, it ends up being in the far east area of Slovakia, right near the Ukrainian border. That road did kind of have a Ukrainian vibe to it, so that location makes a lot of sense in hindsight. Now we have a pretty interesting location. We have like a white car with a long antenna. In Europe again, you guys are noticing the trend here. It's a very Europe heavy duel. Um, so we're on like a thin concrete road here, and I think there was like a few red roofs in the distance, as well as some rolling like fields and trees. So I thought it felt like France, not UK because of the red roofs and the architecture. And Jake one goes in Italy, which is also a nice guess, but it is just France, and I end up coming out with the victory. My next opponent was Nick, who beat Bread in his round. Now my second round, the quarterfinal versus Nick, who was the first seed coming into this. He got first in the first game of the qualifiers. So I thought this would be a pretty tough matchup. Not a player I particularly know well, but I know he's pretty well regarded in the community. Um, and we have a concrete road and some Indonesian pole tops. Unfortunately, I don't know Indo too well, but I was getting either Sumatra or Sulawesi vibe. In the end, I switched to Sumatra. We both send the same guess, and it ends up in South Sulawesi there. So no damage so far, but I'm a little bit frustrated because I definitely could have gone that. Now round two, pretty tough round. We're on kind of a dirt road. Have some wooden poles actually, I think, that are, and we have some kind of fences as well as like these weird low brick buildings. And we had like sizable mountains to the south. So, I mean, with these brick buildings, it was making me lean more towards South America. So I thought the only country this could be was Argentina, probably somewhere in the west with these mountains. And I sent it in here, and wow, I'm 9,000 miles away, and he 5Ks. Of course, it's just the Caucasus Mountains that we were seeing in the distance in Russia there. So a pretty big blunder. I'm still not the happiest about it, but nothing you can do, right? So here we kind of have like autumnish coverage and like this antenna. So I was thinking Kaliningrad or Kaliningrad, but I just go Poland because it didn't really feel right for Kaliningrad. And of course, it is there, Kaliningrad Oblast in Russia, and he almost nearly takes me out. Um, in hindsight, I should have been a bit more risky, or at least just trusted my gut more in general, but particularly in this duel. And here we're on a concrete road. Some palm trees. I feel like it's one of those rounds that feels deceptively south in Philippines, but ends up being more north. So I kind of hedge a bit more central here, and Nick ends up going for a similar guess. Actually, it was on Mindanao, the farthest South Island, and he edges me down to 85 points there. So round five. Um, my first duel was also pretty short. I think around 6 rounds. So I guess I was just trying to just last longer or put up a good fight, but we're already on round five, and I have 85 points left, and he has 5,975. So, with this Colombian cross on the back of the sign, I knew it had to be Colombia. It felt flat, but kind of weird in a sense. So I kind of went like northeast, and um, Nick ends up 5King by plonking a random town on this West Highway in Colombia. I guess it makes sense with the more of the black demographic being predominant in that area, but I do end up losing that one pretty handily. It was obviously a bit of a tough loss, but it is what it is, and you gotta hand it to Nick, such a great player. That's all for today's video, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. This tournament was a bunch of fun. Huge shout outs to the Premier High School Geoguessr League. I'll make sure to link them below in the description. So Nick did end up winning the entire tournament. He came in as the first seed, beat Bread, and then beat me, and then won the semifinals and beat Gorka in the finals. So good win to Nick. He's a great player from Michigan, I believe. But congrats to Nick. And here's the final bracket. So I really enjoyed this tournament, and I'll be sure to participate in some more tournaments in the future and hopefully make some more videos about tourneys. So subscribe to get the latest updates and videos from my channel. Alright everyone, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.